We'll start the session today. So we have like few topics to cover, and those are like we need to cover you, writing test cases for our project, and we need to also cover profiling, like how you can point to uh, different property files, and also we'll see few things for deployment strategy. But we will not be able to deploy, but I'll give some theoretical knowledge and how in your org you can proceed for deployment. So we'll start with writing some test cases for our project. So as of now, like we have created endpoints for our employee management project, and uh, we have seen different types of APIs like writing post APIs, get APIs, put APIs, delete APIs. So we'll try to see like we'll try writing test cases for some of them. And one thing before writing test cases, what we need to do is like we need to have, see, we had our project divided into two. When you expand this source folder, right? You're able to see my screen. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So when you expand this source folder in the employee management project, you see a main folder and you see a test folder. So as of now, we were doing with the development of the API. So whatever development work we had done, so all the code we had written in this main folder. If you see this project structure, it is like your Java and then the package that you created and the several sub packages that you created to create different modules in the project. So we will this was our main module. Here we had written our development of project. Now what we need to do, we need to write some test cases. So we will go in this Java and not just a second, we'll go in this test folder, and then we have this Java over here, and we'll try to create a structure. Like if we want to write some controller level test cases, we'll try to create similar package. So let's create one controller package, and we'll see like how we can write some test cases for controller and service. Means rest will be like similar. So let's also try to create one for service. And when you had created your project, we had connected to a MySQL database, and that MySQL database was used for basically storing your data, whatever data you have inserted, and it was like used for retrieval of the data as well. But uh, for our testing purpose, we don't want to use the same database, right? Because let's say you are testing out some insertion of an employee object, like insertion of an employee record. So we don't want that for testing purpose our data is stored in the same database, right? Because for testing you can like enter any dummy information, enter any random information, and you don't want those things to store in your main database. So for that purpose what we'll do is there is a h2 database, there's a H2 database, and that is like temporary database. Means that is like in memory database. Once your application and all this IntelliJ idea is like stopped, that database gets destroyed. So we will try to utilize that H2 database, and for that what we need to do, we need to do few setup. Means it's easy. uh, can you see this under test? When you expand, you have this resources folder. So in this resources you can go ahead and try to create one application.properties file, and in this application dot properties we will put the configuration such that, means our application, when we are running our test application, it will be basically connecting to that in memory h2 database. So it does not like put any load on our main database. The main database was basically, see, this was the properties that we used for connecting to the main database. We had our MySQL connection, and this was the test DB, and this was the username and password. So similarly, I've created one application dot properties inside this test folder, and this is under this resources. It is similar to what is in the main folder, like it is in source main resources application dot properties. Here for the test module it will be source test resources application dot properties, and I have written down the properties which will be required for the test module. So see, what you are doing is we are changing the data source URL. This is JDBC H2. H2 means this denotes the database. Like here, when we used to connect to our primary database, it was MySQL. So similarly, this is H2, and this is memory, and this is testdb, means we want to create some database name which is called testdb. And for this you can use this driver name like org.h2.driver. For our main database to connect, we had used this driver com.mysql.cj jdbc driver, and the default password and username for uh, this h2 database is the default username is sa, and the default password is empty. You don't have to like provide any password, because this is a temporary database which can be like destroyed after your application is stopped. And you can add like spring.h2.console enable to enable the enable this h2, means that in memory database needs to be enabled. So you can add this h2 console enabled, and we can also add this spring jpa database platform as that hibernate dialect. We can provide this hibernate dialect as well here. So h2 internally will use this and will try to generate some tables. So now how do we generate the tables? This was just about the configuration stuff. This was just about the configuration stuff. If anyone wants this, I can like send it over chat. Let me send it over chat. Okay, this is not getting copied by. Yeah, this you can keep in your test resources, and under that resources there you can create one application dot properties, and you can place these configurations in your uh, test application dot properties. Now we are done with the configuration part. What else do we need to do? So now we need to do some more things, like we will need to place some schema .sql and data.sql. So this schema.sql is basically how your table needs to get loaded into this in-memory database. Means your database is now connected to run the test cases, but you will need some tables as well, right? For testing your APIs. Like we had created one employee table for the primary database. So similarly, what you need to do in in the source main resources, in the primary resources, you can go ahead and try to create a file, and you can name this file exactly like this schema dot schema.sql. So once you create this schema.sql, what you need to do, this schema.sql is where you write your create table script. So remember we had written our create employee table script, right? So we will need to put that same query over here. So let's write down that query, create table employee, and we had three fields, that is ID, name and age. So let's provide the data type integer, and this was not null. Next field was name, which was of text type, and we had one field of integer type, that is age. So this is the table structure that we wanted. This is what we had created for our primary database for writing our APIs. Now we want this table to be automatically loaded for our in-memory database. So you just have to write one schema.sql in your resources folder, and Spring will automatically pick this SQL file to load any new tables. So if you even create any new table, it will be loaded. Now what we'll do is we will create one more file like data.sql. So in case you want to load some data into this in-memory database, so what you can do, you can create one file as data.sql, and you can try inserting your data here. So let's try inserting something. Insert into employee. So you can like write any insert scripts here, id comma name comma age, and then we'll provide some values. 1 comma John comma, let's say the age is 20. So this is a sample example of one of the insert queries which we will write in this data.sql. And this is the create table, means you have created your table in your for the in-memory database. So you have done few of the things now, means like we have created the application.properties in the test folder, and we have provided the configuration for connecting to the in-memory database. And then what we have done is we have created a schema.sql where we have the create table script, and in the data.sql you have the insert records into the database. So those scripts are placed in this data.sql. Now we'll go ahead and try to write some test cases. So here I've created one controller module, means one controller package, where we'll try to write the test cases for some of the APIs. Let's create a class employee controller test, employee controller test, and we'll need to do few of the. Now we will require some more annotations here, like when we created our controller class we required some annotations. So here as well we will require some annotation. So in order for our Spring Boot application to be identified, if we want this class to be identified that we are using this for testing, we will use one annotation, and that is Spring Boot test. See, we had used Spring Boot application annotation when we wanted to run our main application. So there's a similar Spring Boot test which you will use in the classes where you want to write your test cases. So Spring Boot test. Okay, before this thing also I would need some more configurations in the pom.xml. Pom.xml. Second. Okay. So this is our existing pom.xml, and we will need to add some configuration for this testing framework, and also some configuration for your H2 database. So in order to for this H2 database to be configured, we need some we will need some uh, configuration in the pom.xml. We need to load some dependencies, and we need to add this group id as com.h2 database, h2 database, and we'll need to provide the artifact as h2, and we need to provide a scope as well, runtime. So during the load of our project, during the Maven load of your project, we want that this database need to be created. And let's say I have another dependency added. So we will utilize JUnit's a Mockito framework. So for this Mockito framework, we will utilize this. Mockito framework is basically used for writing test cases. So we will need this dependency. Let's add this dependency, org.mockito. Okay, not this. We will require another artifact ID, and let's remove this version. It will take the latest version automatically. So org.mockito, and we will provide this artifact ID as Mockito JUnit Jupyter, and you can keep this scope as test. So this is basically your Mockito. This is your Mockito, and this is your configuring H2 database. So you can reload this project. See, you have your data.sql, you have your schema.sql, you have your application.properties in your test folder, and you have made a few changes to your pom.xml, like com.h2 database. You have added a configuration for H2 database, loading the dependency for H2 database, and you have included this Mockito dependency as well. So now we can get started with writing some of the test cases. So let's reload this project as well. What you can do is you can go to this Maven and reload this project. Okay. Now we'll go to the yes.
From the employee controller or where?
Yeah, no. You can click on the main employee
Main.
management project, and
Okay,
you can go to this Maven and you can reload this project. Okay. Now we have this employee controller test, right? Where we have provided the Spring Boot test annotation. We will need few more things here. See, when we write test cases, what we want to do, like when we created our main application, we had written the controller layer, we had written the service layer, and then we have written the data layer. So your controller layer basically is dependent on your service layer, right? So what you will do, you will need to mock that particular employee service. Means we'll try to like inject that dependency employee service, but not with the at the rate auto wired. When you want to like utilize your uh, service classes for writing test cases, what you can do is this Mockito framework, Mockito dependency that we included, that will allow you to inject some mock object. Mock object means it's similar to your employee service, means it has the everything, all the capabilities to test your controller test cases. So what you can do means mock is basically some kind of like copy of that employee service. Means if we create a mock object of employee service, means we are creating a mock object, it's like a duplicate of that, and we don't need that auto wired dependency for mocking this. What we need a different annotation, and that different annotation is at the rate mock. Now one thing we will need to auto wire is basically we need to create an application context. So let's try to create that auto wired, and this is we need we need some kind of like application context to be provided. Means you remember when we talked about the theory of Spring Boot application, we talked about there's an application context that gets created when we run the main application. So there's an application context class in Spring Boot, and that is getting created internally when we run our main application. So there's a child class of that, that is web application context, which is utilized when we write down our test cases. So let's create this web application context. We need to just auto-wire this. Now what we need to do is we need one more. We need one bean as mock MVC. So see, this mock MVC we will require because we will be using it when writing our test cases. So let's import this mock MVC. We'll see if we require or not, but let's import this. Sometimes you would require, sometimes you would not. So we will see. Okay, now what we can do is you need your employee service as well, because you have dependency, your controller classes have dependency for uh, on the service. So you can utilize this at the rate mock annotations, and let's write down this service employee service. So a duplicate mock object of this employee service is created. So we'll need this employee service when we write down the test cases. Now, what are the other things that we can require? We had validated our APIs as well. When we in the last class we went for our project validation, right? So what we had done, we had a validator class as well, where we had written few of the test cases, few of the validation scenarios, like we wanted to validate the age of the employee to be enrolled in the organization. So we will require to mock that particular validator as well. So let's write down at the rate mock, and let's uh, import this validator as well. Okay, what next? Okay, it did not get imported. Import class validator com.myarg. Okay, so we have few of the annotations used. We have created our web application context. We have our mock MVC. Now what we want to do is, like before each, we'll write some test cases, but before each test cases that needs to be run, we want some setup to be done to this particular employee controller test. We want this mock MVC to get initialized and set the context. So for that, we write one method like private void setup. This is a setup method for creating an application context for our testing. So what you need to do is, you can do something like this dot mock MVC. You can initialize that mock MVC what you have created, and for this what we need, mock MVC builders and web application context. So this mock MVC builders does provide some library to set this web application context. And what you can provide in this is, you can provide the this dot web application context, and then you need to build this. So this is a one-time thing that we will be doing, and we will not do it again and again. So this is a one-time thing to create this application context. We need to initialize this mock MVC with the web application context, and we want to use an annotation like before each. What before each does is, before running the test suite anytime, this will create this application context. I think we are good to get started with writing our first unit test cases. So whenever you want to write your test cases, you need to use one annotation before every test cases, and that annotation is @test. So see, this test annotation basically comes from org.junit.jupyter API. So remember, in the pom.xml we have added this Mockito JUnit Jupyter. So these are the dependencies which will allow you to further go ahead and try to import these things. Like these imports come from there itself, because you have added dependency in the pom.xml. Okay, now let's write down our test cases. Void. Let's say we want to register, we want to test our register employee functionality, where we want to enroll a new employee. So let's say how we will test that out. So we can write something like, we can provide any name here like test register employee, and our controller API threw some exception as well. Remember, here we had, in this post mapping API, we had thrown some invalid input exception, customer already exists exception, and all those things. So what we can do is, you can choose, or you can choose to just throw a generic exception. It is fine for test cases. Now what we'll do is, let's create one employee object. Let's create one employee object, and we will see if we are able to hit our APIs and like create that. We will try to test our APIs like this API, the API for creating the employee, API slash v1 slash register slash employee. So we'll need one employee object for containing our payload, and then what we'll do is, we will try to create this employee object. We'll try to create this employee in the organization. So let's try to create one employee object. Okay, and we will provide the ID, name, and age of the employee. So let's say employee dot set ID, employee dot set name, employee dot set age, let's say 20. Okay, now we will use the Mockito framework. Now we will utilize this Mockito framework for writing our test cases. See, this Mockito framework provides you with several inbuilt methods. So the first step in our API was that we validated the age, right? We validated the age. So before calling our service module, we will validate the age as well. So what we can do is we can utilize this Mockito framework. So we'll write something like this: Mockito dot when, Mockito dot when. We have this validator injected as well, validator mock object, right? So in this when, what we'll do is validator dot valid validator dot validate age, and in this age we require some integer value, right? So you can pass values something like this, not hard code any values, but you can pass this value like this: Mockito dot any integer. Means when you pass this, means the Mockito framework understands that you are passing any integer to be validated. And what you want to do is after this you can write down then return true. That means you, with this statement what you are saying is your age is validated. You are assuming that the age is getting validated. So Mockito dot when validator dot validate age. This age required some integer value, right? Some age value. So you have provided that, and then you are saying that your age is getting validated. Now further what you need to do is you need to create a request builder for this request builder will be basically containing all those payload things and all. So we have something like mock MVC request builders. You need to utilize this mock MVC request builder. And since our register employee was a post method, right? So we will use this post method. And see, this post method takes a URI. URI means URL. So we need to pass the URL of our register employee method. So it was like API slash v1 slash register slash employee. And now what you need to do is you need to pay some pass some payload as well to this API, right? Like we used to pass in the body that JSON format. So what we need to do is we'll need to create something to convert this employee object to JSON format. So let's write down some utility which will convert your object into JSON format. So we'll create one util package in under this test module. So com.myorg.util. Here we'll write one utility for converting the Java object to JSON format. So let's name this. Okay. Oh, okay. What happened? Java class. Okay. Let's name this as JSON util. And in this class, we will just create one single method, which will basically which will take our object and it will return the JSON format in the string format. So let's create this as static method because uh, we want this method to be accessed with the class name. So for that purpose, our method needs to be static, and we want that JSON to be returned as a string type. So What we do is we take our Java employee object, we convert it into a JSON and return it as a string. So let's name this as get JSON string, and we provide any object, means this will be used for uh, making any object into the JSON format. So we take a generic object as object, and this method can throw some kind of like JSON processing exception as well. So what we can do, we can pass that exception here and we'll create our method now. So there is some utility like object mapper in Java. So we will utilize this object mapper. This is object mapper is basically used for this JSON functionality itself. If you want to map an object to JSON, right, you can utilize this object mapper. So we'll see how you can do. With this object mapper instance, you can configure this object mapper.con. We need to configure this object mapper, and we need to provide this like serialization feature dot wrap root value. So this is one thing which we will need to do, and it takes one parameter like boolean value, which we can set it to false. And then once we have used this object mapper, there's an object writer. So this is one piece of code which you can do it like one time and then utilize it always. So in this object mapper that we had created, we will utilize that object mapper, and we will use the writer method in this to write it as a JSON. And there's a default pretty printer, means it is like beautifying that JSON. So for that there is a method, we can set this up. And finally what we can do is we can return this ow dot write value as string. No need to panic if you're seeing a lot of new libraries today, means it's just this is like, even if you like google it out, you will get something like the object mapper and these things, how you convert this utility to a JSON string, means this is easily available. So what we are doing, we are taking a Java object and converting into JSON, and we are returning it as a string. So we will use this method in our test cases, and this is a static method. For that purpose, the static method can be called with the help of your class name as well. So let's try out writing our test cases now. So we were creating our request builder. So while creating this request builder, we need few things. This API needs some things, right? It needs our JSON object as a payload. So what we'll do is we will pass this in content. We will now utilize that JSON util dot get string object will want that JSON string, and we are passing this employee object that we had created above, and we need to like specify the content type as well, like our APIs are handling which type of request. Is it JSON request, is it like XML request, or is it like HTML? So for that you will need to pass some content type. So let's pass this is the header which needs to be set. So here you can pass like application JSON, because all the APIs that we have written like handles JSON value. So this is like setting up the header, and this request builder object is created. See what we have done, we have passed the URL. This is our create employee URL, and we have passed the payload. this payload is now converted to a JSON string, and we are handling JSON type of data. So for that purpose, we have added this headers as well. Now this Mockito framework provides us with a method for using this request builder and getting the status of our API. So let's use this MVC result. Let's name it as result. So mock MVC dot perform. There's a method called perform which will take our request builder which we just created. So we will pass this request builder here and we will return. So if you see this and return, it will provide some MVC result. This MVC result basically contains your response of this API. So what we'll do is, now we will check if this response that we have got is proper or not. So remember, when you created any new employee in the organization, we got a status code of 201. So it should match the response of this result should also match us 201. Result dot get response dot get status. There is some method called get status. Okay, we will need to import this assert equals as well. So we are getting some help from the editor that you need to import this assert equals. So let's click on this. So now this is done. So let's try to run this. So to run this, what you can do, you can hover over the screen icon and you can try to run this. Okay, this test case has passed. See, this test case has passed. If this test case has failed, you might get a failed here. You might get some red cross here if this test case has failed. So this time our test case has basically passed. So we'll write down another test case now. Okay, everyone understood this? Means other test cases will also be similar to this. Now that you have understood, we'll repeat the same thing again and again. Rest of the things would be repetitions. So let's test out another API. We had one API for getting all the employees, right? So let's test that out. So we will create another test case with void test get employees, and let's again pass this throws exception here, and let's okay, we'll try to see get employees basically returned us a list of the employees as the response, right, and a status code of 200. So we'll see some of the things. So in this example, in the previous example, right, test register employee, what we did was we uh, created our payload and we passed it to the request builder. In this request builder, we also passed out the exact URL which we used for creating our which we were using for hitting our APIs. So similarly, we will utilize the same for getting our employees as well, for testing this get employees feature. So this API basically returned us a list of the employees, right? So this list of the employees will be required. So let's say what you want to do is you want to create a list of the employee. Let's import this list. let's name this as employee list and new array list. We'll create a new array list for this test case. Let's create one employee object. Okay, let's say I'll just copy this employee object, and I've copied this employee object and I will add it to the list that I've created. I have a list and I will add this employee. I will add this employee object to this employee list. Okay. Now we have done, now we have created a list of employees. What we'll do is we will utilize again the Mockito frameworks. So we'll use this Mockito dot when. So for getting the employees, for getting all the employees right in our API, just see this. What URL we had used was /employees, and this should be prefixed with the base URL. So we will try to do the same here. It was like /API/v1/employees, and we were calling our service method that was get all employees. So we'll try to see how we can do that. So what we'll do is this dot employee service dot get all employees, this was the method, right? Dot then read. Okay, so we are calling that method dot get all employees, and what we are expecting, we are expecting to return employee list. See what we are trying to do is we are utilizing this Mockito framework. Means if this method of get employees, if get all employees method is hit, which is there in this service layer, then we want this particular object to be returned. And see, there are two things that we are doing. We are utilizing this Mockito framework to return as a output, which is this employee list. And now we will be creating one API with the request builder, which we will hit. And then what we'll do is we will like verify whether we are getting the same 200 output or not. So we will try to again create that request builder. So let's create our request builder again. Request builder is equal to, we can use the same type of code like mock MVC request builders. So we will again use the same mock MVC request builders dot. So this is a get API, right? So we will use a get here, and then we'll pass the URL. So in the previous example, that was a post request. That's why we have used this post. Now we will use this get request. So /API/v1/employees. This was our URL, and we need to again pass this header. So I'll just copy paste it from here. Okay, and I think we should be done. For this, what we need to do is we need to now extract the MVC result from this. So MVC result equal to result, and we will now use this mock MVC to pass this request builder that we created. So request builder dot and return. Okay, and now we will again utilize that assert equals. So this API used to provide us with a status code of 200, right? So you can check if your API that you have like you are trying to hit with your Mockito framework? Is it providing you a response status of 200 or not? So get response dot get status. Okay, let's try to run this. Oh, why am I not being able to run this? Okay, I've missed out this at the rate test annotation here. If you do not provide this at the rate test annotation, means this method cannot be like tested. So in order to specify that this method is a unit test case, you need to provide at the rate test annotation. So let's go ahead and try to run this. Okay, okay, our test case has passed. We are able to test this get employees. So we have created two test cases now, one for registering the employee, one for getting the employees. Okay, we'll write few more test cases. Let's say we had another API, right? We'll see another API where we wanted to get this API, get this employee with the help of this ID, means get a particular employee. Let's test out this functionality if you want to get a particular employee by ID. So we will create another method and we'll try to test this. Okay, let's name this as test get employee by ID, get employee by ID. Okay, throws exception. Okay, now let's copy this. See, this API returned us a single employee object, right? So let's try to create one single employee object as the output. And what we'll do is we will again use this same thing, mockito.when these dot employee surveys, and now it would be it you would see that all the code is like similar. So get employee, this is the service method, and what we'll do is we'll use it to pass any ID, and ID was basically of type integer. And if you pass this, what we need is we need to return any new employee, or let's say we can pass any new employee here. And then again we will create this request builder, request builder. Now it would be like all the test cases that you write to test the APIs, right? It will follow a similar practice. This was a get API as well, so we will utilize this get API, and the path was slash API slash v1 slash employee. This time it is just employee, not employees. But along with this, we needed to pass our query parameter, right? Remember, for fetching a single employee, we used to pass the query parameter. So here also, we need to pass that query parameter. So this request builder basically has one method for passing the query param, and that is param, where you want to pass the key and values. So key is basically ID, and then we want to pass the value, but this value should be wrapped in a string here, because this takes keys and values both in the type of string. So we will need to wrap this value as string itself. Okay, our ID would be 20 here, and what we would do is we would need again this header content type as JSON. So this header content type is JSON here, and okay, I think we should be good here. We are done creating our request builder object. We have provided the param. Okay, we need to do one more thing. we need to do one more thing, that is we need to uh, pass this content as JSON content. We have created one utility method, right? We will utilize that as well. JSON util get JSON string. Okay, now let's test out whether this works or not. We will create our MVC result, and we'll utilize the mock MVC.perform. We'll pass our request builder object, and then we'll return, and we'll again verify with, we can use this assert equals to see if our API is basically returning 200 response or not. So let's try out, and okay, again I missed out this at the rate test annotation. Okay, now you can try out to test this get employee by ID. Okay, this is fine, this is also passed, so we are able to get employee by ID. Now this was like testing out our controller layer APIs. Now let's say you want to say test your service layer methods. So how you can do that? Means this is like testing out the APIs, and this has basically like test, means in a way when you write this kind of test cases, it has tested your service layer and the DAO layer as well, because this API goes ahead and tries to like hit the service layer, and internally that entire thing is tested. But if you just want to test out your service layer, what will you do? Okay, let's try out writing one employee service test class here, and it will be now similar for you, means it would be similar, a lot of the things would look similar. Employee service test. So your service test, right, this would require your data layer object as well, right? Because we used to call the data layer from the service layer. So what we need to do here is we need to create the mock object of the employee DAO. Okay, there's some typo. So we will need to create this employee DAO mock object, employee DAO, and also one more thing. These mock objects are used to inject the dependent classes. Now I want to inject this service MPL as well. So in order to do that, we use a different annotation. Means we want to test out our service class methods, right? So for that we will use a different annotation, and that is inject mocks. So private employee service IMPL employee service. See, this is a dependent object which is required in the service layer, but this is the service layer object itself. So for injecting the service layer object itself, we will use inject mocks. And if there was any other dependent thing, any other dependent object like the validator or the DAW layer object that we were using in this particular class, we would require to mock that thing. This is the class that you want to test is basically employee service IMPL. So you don't have to mock the class which you are trying to test. Remember this thing, the class that I am trying to test is employee service IMPL. I don't have to mock that. I have to inject mock that. And this, the classes that are used as a dependency for this employee service IMPL, those objects need to be mocked. So that is why I have mocked this employee DAO. Now again here as well, what we'll try to do, we'll do a similar setup. We'll write our setup method here as well. So what you can try to do is you can create this void setup method, and let's write down some code here. Means we'll try to create a list of employees. So before any test cases are run, we want this setup to be done. So we will use this before each annotation as well. Before each, and let's try to go ahead and create a list of employee list is equal to new array list. Okay, we need to like import this list. Employee, will create a few employee objects. New employee, and let's say employee dot set id, one employee dot set name, let's say it is John. Employee dot set age, let's say 25. Okay, now let's create another employee object as well, and let's name this as employee 2. Employee 2. Okay, and we'll set some new data. Let's say this id is 2, name is Andrew, and age is 23, and we will add both these objects to our employee list. So this setup we want before each of the test cases run. So that's why we have kept it like at a common place in this before each setup. Let's add both the employee objects, employee list dot add employee 2, and now what we need to do is see our employee DAO had one method to fetch all the employees. So we are trying to hit that API, and we'll see that once that is hit, that employee DAO, it returns this employee list. Means you are trying to mock the database. You have already created the data, and what you want to do is you want to now call your data layer. Means that would not hit your actual database, that but that will hit your in-memory database, and that in-memory database is basically containing this two data employee objects information. So what you can try to do is you can write down this, then return employee list. Okay, what went wrong? Okay, this is fine. So what you are trying to do is you have created some objects, and means you are mocking your data layer to send this particular employee list. Means when you like access this fetch all employees method from this employee DAO, it will not return the actual data that was set in your primary database. It will return only this data that you are using for testing purpose. So let's write down mockito.when this dot employee dot fetch employees, and we are expecting to return this employee list. Now let's try to test out our get employees. So we will use this at the rate test, and what I need to do is I need to write a void get employees. So this method basically returns me a list of the employee. So I'll create a list of the employee list, or employees is fine. And what I'll do is, from our service layer inject mock object that I have, I need to call the get all employees, employees service dot get all employees. So this basically goes ahead and calls this this basically calls your get all employees of the service method. Now we will verify if the data layer that is like getting me this employee list, and when I'm calling this method from the service layer, if the data is matching or not. So we will write this assert equals, and what we can do is we can verify. See, we have added two objects to the employee list, and the first object is basically this one. So let's try to verify that the first object ID is 1 or not. So employee list, okay, one second. Okay, employees dot get. So this list basically, if we want to access the first object, we need to pass the index 0. If we want to access the second object, we need to pass the index 1. So we need to like verify if the IDs are same or not. Again, I need to import this assert equals. Let's try to run this. Okay, we have something failed here. What went wrong? Okay, private employee before each void setup. Okay, let me see what went wrong. Dot then return employee list. Okay, one second. Okay, this dot employee dot fetch all employees dot then return employee list. This looks fine. And one dot employee dot get 0 dot get ID. Okay, let me put a debug point here. What is going wrong? And let me put a debug point here as well. Let me try. Okay, I have missed something. I have missed one of the annotations here. Remember, we have used one Spring Boot test annotation when we wrote our previous test class, that controller test class. I have missed this thing here, Spring Boot test. Okay, let me try to run this again. If this passes, it's fine. Otherwise, I'll use this debugger. Okay. Okay, this is fine. This is passed. Okay, I missed out this Spring Boot test annotation on top of the class. See, there are different ways as well. There are some JUnit annotations as well, which you can like write it out. But the simplest thing is you can write this Spring Boot test annotation. Okay, TJ, you're saying this employee service is an interface. See, when you use this inject mocks, right, you will use an inject mock to basically inject the class. this is one thing you need to be careful. When you want to inject the mocks, you will inject the class, not the interface. But when you want to like mock anything, you can use this mock object over the interface. Means this employee DAO is an interface. You can easily mock this. And for inject mocks, you will need to inject the class. So we have tested the get employees method. We'll test our another method as well. Like we had one method for fetching the employee with the help of the ID. So let's test that method as well. Void get employee by ID, and this would basically return as a single object. So let me try to create some object here like employee is equal to new employee, and let's set some id employee dot set id. Let's say I'm setting the id as 100. Employee dot set name, let's say Matthew. Employee dot set age, let's say 26. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to call our Mockito framework and verify. I want to call the DAO layer object. So I'll use this employee DAO dot fetch employee by ID. Let's say I'm passing this 100 as the ID, and I want to return the employee object. So we'll see when this data layer method is called by this 100 ID, if it returns this object or not. We will try to verify. So what we can do is we can again do this assert equals, and what we can verify is we can verify the ID if it is same or not. So let's say I want to call this method from employee service now. Employee service dot get employee. Let me pass this dot get ID. So what I'm trying to do is, see, for the previous test case, this Mockito statement was used from here. Means we mocked the data layer, we like mocked that data layer to send us this particular object, and after that what we did, we called our service layer method. So this is exactly again what I'm doing. I mocked the data layer to return me this object, and what I'm trying to do now is I'm trying to call this service layer method, this get employee, and trying to see if this id exactly matches with the mocked data object. So let's try to run this. Okay, I'm running the previous test case itself. My bad. I need to provide at the rate test here, and I'll need to run this one. Okay, what went wrong this time? Null pointer exception at the rate Spring Boot test. Okay, like 100. Okay, I have created this id as 100. Sorry, expected 100. I'm creating an object with 100 and I'm searching it with 20. Let me try out now. Okay, that was like I was passing some bad data because this is the object that is getting used, and this Mockito framework has to return this data, right? That is why, see, what this does is, understand this, when we are trying to use the Mockito framework to call the data layer method with id 100, then we are expecting this object to return, right? So now that we are using to get the employee with the ID 100, what we are trying to do, we will, this internally again hits the data layer, right? So we'll try to see if the method in the service layer works fine or not, and if that ID returned is 100 or not. So if this does not meet, then our test case will fail. If it meets, our test case will pass. So let's try to assert some more things. Like let's try to assert the age as well. Like we will verify the age as well. Get employee, and then we'll pass the ID, and then we'll pass get age. So let's try to verify this as well. See, you are passing the employee ID in this get employee method, right? And you are trying to get the age, and this is like matching with the age that you have mocked in this particular object. So this is the way you can like proceed to write further test cases. These are true cases. Okay, how about false cases? So you can write down any false test cases as well. Like see, in case of your test failure, like what you want to do is, if you write down any wrong data, this will provide a failure for this. See, what it is saying is there is some assertion error. Expected was 25, actual is 26. Why? Because the object that you created was having the data as 26, which was expected by your data layer to throw, and you are doing a wrong assertion. See this thing. This is assertion failure. So in this case, what you need to do is you need to like fix this thing. Means this way you can like verify if your test cases are working fine for the negative test cases or not. So there are some cases where you want to like write any more test cases as well. Means I have shown you for this controller layer and this service layer. Similarly, you can utilize it to write more test cases. You will have to do this similar setup in the DAW layer as well. You will have to like inject the things. You will have to, means basically it's all about like mocking dependencies. It's about mocking dependencies and trying to hit the API that you have defined in that particular class. Okay, this was about the testing framework, and we have utilized Mockito. Now I've got one or few topics to cover. Okay, is that only from console? We always check the positive and negative test cases. No, TJ, you can do write some more test cases to test your negative test cases as well. Like if you are throwing some exception as well or throwing some bad data as well, right? What you can do, you can write test cases as well for that, and you can assert equal, like if that scenario is getting replicated or not. So you can do that as well. Those are also fine. Means you can write and you can like expect the status code as like let's say 400. You can do that as well. You can do write test cases as similar to that as well. So try writing down the test cases and then you will verify you will be able to see if you are able to run your test cases according to your code or not. Means if you write down some test cases, you will be able to see if your code is working properly or not. Means whatever data you are sending and whatever response you are trying to receive, if you are getting or not. So these test cases are necessary. Means even when you work in any company, in any project requirement you have, you will need to definitely write down the test cases. Means in company, generally sometimes companies would set a norm that at least whatever code you have written, you have to cover 75% or 80% of the code with your test cases. So writing test cases is also necessary. You can like try to write down the data layer test cases as well, and you can try to write down any number of test cases. Means I had shown you few test cases which needs to be written. Now let me try to show you something about the how we point to different environments. I talked about that, right, previous class, that we need to cover this. So we will try to see, as of now we just have a single application dot properties file. Let me try to close everything else. Okay, as of now we just have a single property file. But let's say you are working with different environments. You are working with, say, a local environment, you are working with UAT environment, and you are working with, let's say, a prod environment and all those things. So how you can, like, if you want to like point to some different property file, let's say this, I've created some files. Let me name this. You will always follow this convention, like application, then you will provide this hyphen, and then you will provide the environment. Let's say I'm having one as local environment, so I'll use this local dot properties. So this way Spring understands. I'll show you how. Again, now let's try to utilize application. We will try to create one property file for UAT. So this is one property file. See, your environment name is local for this one, and your environment name is UAT for this property file. So you can just uh, prefix that with hyphen UAT. See, in this application dot properties, what we did means we have suffixed this property files with hyphen and with the environment name. So you should follow this convention. Only then your Spring Boot will understand that these are the property files. Okay, I'll copy the same property for now because I don't have a different environment or anything set up. But let's try to understand this. This is like simple and quite easy to understand. So I have copied the same thing here as well in both the property files. And now let's remove everything from this property file application.properties. I have removed everything. So now my property file is empty and I want to point to this local property file. So what I'll do, I'll just have to use one property here, spring dot profiles dot active. And if you want to point to your local property file, you have to provide local. If you want to like point to your UAT property file, you will have to provide UAT. That is the thing. Let's try to see, like our application was working fine with application.properties, right? Let's see with this if we are able to like run our application or not. Okay, let me try to run our application. See, our application has started fine, and let's try to like verify, like after this change that we did, in the application.properties, we are pointing to this file and we are getting all the properties from this. So let's try to just hit out and see if our APIs are working fine or not. So let me try to hit out this API. Okay, it works fine. And this works fine. So this is just a thing about checking this if the properties are working fine or not. If you want to like point to this UAT, what you can do is you can just change this environment from local to UAT. This is just the change. So in your projects, in any company related projects, you will have like several property files for several environments, several different environments. So this is exactly what you need to do. You can create a single application.properties, and there you can just provide the instance name that you want to point to. Like if you want to point to local, provide it local. If you want to provide a point to UAT, you can provide the UAT value here. And similarly, if you want to use any other property file like prod, you can use the prod property file. Okay, so this was about like pointing to different property file. We have one last topic that is left in Spring Boot that's not related to actually Spring Boot, but I think TJ asked about the deployment in last class, right? Last to last class, he asked about deployment. So I will not be able to like deploy the entire thing here because but I will show you what are the steps that we need to deploy things in production. So I'll show you some example of like if we use like one of the deployment strategies as Cloud Foundry. So see, when deploying an application, what are the basic things that you need to take care of? One thing is you have created your entire project or module, and you need to like you will need to package that a particular project, right? So see, when we created our pom.xml, what we did was we had created a packaging type as well, and that packaging type is a jar packaging type. So what it will do is if you try to like run your project, it will create a jar. See, what you need to do is I'll show you this. This is the version of your project, right? This is the version of your project, like employee management, and this is the version of your project. This is the specific version. And if you and the Java version is basically 1.8. If you go and click on the right hand side, this Maven, right? You can see my cursor. You click on this Maven, you can go ahead and do click on this. There will be one life cycle tab. You can go ahead and try to double click on this. If you double click, it is running a command of mvn clean, and if you again run on this install, this will basically generate, this will run your test cases, and it will generate a jar file in the target. So this is in the target. In the target you see this snapshot.jar, right? So this is your, this jar file basically contains all the code that you have written. It is exactly contained in a single jar. So this is your packaged application. So how you deploy is you basically deploy this jar itself, and we will see how you deploy this jar. So see, deployment is a very vast topic, and there are like different deployment strategies. There is one deployment. You can deploy your application on AWS. You can deploy your application on Pivotal Cloud Foundry. You can deploy your application on Kubernetes. So there are like lot of different cloud providers which you will which you can utilize. Let's and for let's say I'll talk about Cloud Foundry now, Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So what you need to do is you need to create one manifest.yaml. Okay. You need to create one manifest.yaml, and in this manifest.yaml you can go ahead and try to click here and create a file, and that here at the root of your project you will create one manifest.yaml. And what you need to provide, you need to provide few details over here, like this is a YAML file, and in this YAML file you can provide this tag as applications, and the name of your application you can provide. And your whenever your application is like deployed to the cloud, it will require some memory, right? It will require some memory. Let's say I have provided 512 megabyte. And what is this instances? Suppose on your cloud deployment, wherever you are doing the deployment, you want like two replicas of this project. Means, let's say why we increase the instances or replicas is because whenever the load on your system gets heavy, right, you can increase the instances. Means what happens, that some of the request can go to one of the replica of your application, and some of the request will go to the other replica of your application. So this is why you can increase the instances. And see, this path is basically the path of your jar file. This path is basically the path of your jar file. So if you go to this target, this is the path. If you copy this path, right, this is the path. Means I have taken the relative path, and that is why this target, under this target you have this particular jar available, right? So you can put this path of the packaged jar. Means your jar is your jar of your application is generated here, and you need the path here. So similarly you can provide any environment variables as well. Let's say we make one spring profile active. So spring profile active is basically, if you deploy your application to cloud, you can create one profile, like we created different profile like local and UAT just now, right? So you can create one profile for cloud, and what Java version you are specifying, those things you can mention in your environment. So this is one sample example of your manifest.yaml. This manifest.yaml is used for your deployment to Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So understand something, like when you deploy your application, you have your cloud setup already done by your company or some DevOps team. They might have done some cloud infrastructure setup, and you need some kind of client to communicate with the server, right? You need some kind of client to communicate with the server. So there is one Cloud Foundry client that you need to like download and install. So that is like another step. You can like Google those things, like how you do an installation and all, but I will not be able to like demonstrate that, because anyways we don't have the cloud setup, cloud server setup and all. So one thing is, means it's just kind of like terminal. Means once you like install that Cloud Foundry on your CMD, you can like use the commands. There is some once you download and install, you will be able to run those commands on your CMD. So that client can talk to the cloud on your server. So that is how the client communicates with the server. So now what happens, you need to like include some dependencies in your pom.xml file as well. So you have created your manifest file, and you need to basically place some dependencies in your pom.xml file. I'm not doing it because I will not be able to deploy, but I have like added this in the slides. So these are the things that you need to add in your pom.xml. See, in the dependency management, we have dependencies, and in these dependencies, you need to add the cloud dependency, like Spring Cloud dependencies. And this is one of the versions, Greenwich dot release, and you need to like provide the type pom and scope as import. So this is one dependency that you need to add. Like this will basically like enable your application to use the cloud dependencies. So this is one of the dependency that you need to add, and there are like some Spring Boot dependencies along with cloud that needs to be added. So these are another two dependencies that need to be added. This is Spring Cloud Starter, and one is Spring Boot Starter Cloud Connectors. So these dependencies you need to include in your pom.xml file. So once you do this setup, you need to do one more thing. In the plugins, this is also in your this plugin section. If you see your pom.xml, there's a plugin section as well. So in this plugins section, you can add this particular plugin, like this Spring Boot Maven plugin, and the final name of the project you can provide this project.name hyphen cf. Means you can replace this project name with the employee management application hyphen cf, or you can like create one tag like project.name in the top, and you can keep this. So what are the things that you did for deploying your application? You added these three dependencies in your pom.xml, and you added this plugin in your pom.xml, and you created a manifest YAML which you have kept in your root folder, right? You created this and you have kept it in the root folder. So after you do all this, the client that you have installed, you will need to run this command cf login -a, and you will need to provide the URL of your cloud server where you are wanting to deploy. Let's say there is some UAT environment URL that is provided by your company. That is the server on which you want to like uh, deploy your application. So this URL you need to provide for your cloud server. And once you hit this login, means after this first command, if you are able to hit this, it will ask for your username and password. So whatever username and password you have for like connecting to your company's cloud environment, you can provide that. And after that, what you need to do is you have to on your local, on that particular client, a cloud foundry client, you have to navigate to the manifest.yaml path, and from there you need to run this particular command cf push -f manifest.yaml. So once you like push this manifest.yaml, it basically takes all the information. See, this manifest file already contains the target jar, right? So it will deploy that particular target jar to the destination, that is the cloud. So these are the few steps that you need to take while you want to deploy your application to Pivotal Cloud Foundry. So there are like different deployment strategies like AWS, Kubernetes, and like Azure, Microsoft Azure. So deployment is a lot whole bigger concept, and there's like if you want to like study Dockers and Kubernetes, there's like a lot of concepts in those as well. But Cloud Foundry is one of the simplest ways I would say to deploy your application. The deployment in Cloud Foundry is easy, but Dockers and Kubernetes comes with its all means its own added advantage. So uh, this is about the deployment of your application onto Cloud Foundry. So anyone has any questions in this deployment? Uh, Means we will not be able to demonstrate this, but yeah, these are the few things which you need to understand about deploying your applications. In any other deployment strategy as well, things will be similar, but the way of configuring will be a little different. Okay, so we have covered all the topics for Spring Boot, and we are done with our Spring Boot training as well. And I will share you all the. So this was today was the last class of your Spring Boot training. We have seen our deployment as well. We were able to cover testing of our project as well, and we had seen the how we point to different profiles. So today is your last class. We will not be having any more classes. You can go over all this. I have already given this access of this particular slide to you, and I'll give the project as well along means I'll send the entire project that we have created throughout the Spring Boot training. I will send it to you through Google Drive. You can like download that and try to like import that. Some of you have like already like developed, and I was like very happy to see that you have like worked on that. So you can I'll uh, add all your emails and provide you access to that jar as well, to that entire project, and you can like import that particular project into your workspace if someone has not done. If you have done, it's like very good and fine. So this is it about Spring Boot training. You have entire is in this last 2 months you have studied a lot of the core Java concepts and a lot of this Spring Boot training. Yeah, these documents I've already shared, Gaso. I'll again reshare this Spring Boot training doc as well. I've already provided you access as well. I will provide you the link for accessing the project as well. I'll do it in some time. And all the YouTube videos are also available. Today's video also I'll be like uploading. So this is about it. Let me stop the share.